The prescription bottle slipped from my fingers, plastic clattering against the hardwood floor. Pills scattered like tiny white stars across the polished surface my late husband Thomas had installed 40 years ago. As I reached down to collect, "Them!" my hip protested with a familiar ache. That's when I heard the whispers from the kitchen. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Mom can't even keep track of her medications anymore." My son Richard's voice, hushed but clear enough to reach me in the hallway. "I found her checkbook in the refrigerator last week." Patty, my daughter, her tone dripping with exaggerated concern. "And the amounts never add up right. We have to do something before she hurts herself, or worse, gets taken advantage of by some scammer." I froze, pills forgotten on the floor. My own children were plotting against me, discussing my mental decline as if I were already gone. The irony wasn't lost on me. The checkbook had been in the refrigerator because Richard had moved it while searching for juice the day before. And my medication had slipped because Beth, Richard's wife, had replaced my usual bottles with easier-to-open caps that were, in fact, far more difficult for my arthritic fingers. Little did they know that what they were witnessing wasn't mental decline. It was something else entirely, something that would shock them all when the truth finally came to light. My name is Martha Wilson, and for 85 years, I've lived life on my own terms. I raised 2 children after losing Thomas to cancer when they were teenagers. I managed our hardware store until I was 75, turning it into the most successful business in downtown Riverdale. I volunteered 3 days a week at the library, teaching adult literacy classes. I gardened, played bridge, and baked award-winning pies for the county fair every summer. In short, I lived. But somewhere along the way, my children stopped seeing me as Martha and started seeing me only as Mom, a fragile entity to be managed rather than a person with dreams and agency. It began subtly. Richard would check in more frequently, always glancing around my home with narrowed eyes, as if inspecting for failures. Patty started scheduling my doctor appointments without consulting me first. My grandchildren were instructed to report back anything concerning they noticed during visits. Grandma forgot where she put her glasses. They'd whisper on the phone, not realizing I could hear them from the next room. Never mind that the glasses were simply pushed up on my head, as they had been 1,000 times before. The whispered conversation I overheard that Tuesday morning was different, though. This wasn't casual concern. This was conspiracy. My children were building a case for my incompetence, collecting evidence like prosecutors preparing for trial. I finished gathering my pills from the floor, my movements deliberately precise. I would need to be careful now. Every moment observed could become another piece of evidence. Every misplaced item or forgotten name might be the final proof they needed to take away my independence. My suspicions were confirmed 2 days later when Richard arrived unannounced, carrying a folder tucked under his arm. He never visited on Thursdays. Thursdays were his squash days with colleagues, sacred and unchangeable since he'd turned 40. Whatever had pulled him from his routine must be important. "Mom," he said, settling into Thomas's old armchair without being invited, "we need to talk about the future." The future, as if mine was something to be discussed and decided by committee. "I'm listening," I said, folding my hands in my lap. Calm, composed, sharp as the needle I'd used to mend his torn football jersey when he was 12. "Patty and I have been talking." He cleared his throat, a habit he'd had since childhood when approaching something difficult. "We're worried about you living alone in this big house. It's too much to maintain, and there are stairs, and you're getting, well, you know." "Old?" I supplied. "I've been old for quite some time, Richard. It hasn't stopped me yet." He smiled that patronizing smile that made me want to throw something. "It's not just the house, Mom. We've noticed you're becoming forgetful, missing appointments, confusion with your medications, The stove left on twice last month. The stove incident had been Beth, rushing to answer her phone while making tea. The missed dermatologist appointment had been rescheduled by the office without proper notification. But I could see by his expression that counterarguments would only reinforce whatever narrative he'd already constructed. "We've been looking into some options," he continued, opening the folder. Inside were glossy brochures for Golden Pines. Assisted living facility, pages turned down at the corners to mark specific sections. It's a beautiful community. Private apartments, but with staff available 24/7. You'd have meals prepared, activities, friends your own age. Friends my own age. As if being 85 meant I could only relate to others with the same birth decade. "That's thoughtful," I said carefully, taking the brochure but not looking at it. "But I'm quite content here." Richard leaned forward, his expression so earnest it almost masked the determination underneath. "Mom, it's not just about what you want anymore. It's about what you need. Safety, care, professional oversight." The word hung between us, unspoken but unmistakable: control. "I'll think about it," I said, knowing it would be easier than arguing. Richard had always been stubborn, a quality I'd once admired in him. After he left, I sat in my garden, watching bees navigate the lavender bushes I'd planted decades earlier. There had been a time when Richard would sit beside me, asking endless questions about each insect, each flower. Now he saw this garden as another burden I couldn't manage, rather than the joy it had always been. That evening, I called my friend Doris Henderson. We'd taught Sunday school together for 30 years before she moved to the other side of town to be closer to her daughter. "They're gathering evidence," I told her, keeping my voice low despite being alone in the house. "Habits form quickly, when you feel watched." Richard brought brochures today, for Golden Pines. "Oh, Martha." Doris's voice crackled over the line. "Not the nursing home pitch. Joyce's son did the same thing to her last year. Next thing you know, they were selling her house out from under her." "They can't force me," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Can't they?" Doris sighed. "Joyce's children convinced her doctor she was showing signs of dementia. Once they had that diagnosis, they applied for guardianship. It was all very legal." A chill ran through me. I'd been approaching this as a disagreement, a matter of asserting my independence. But if they were building a case to declare me legally incompetent, this was war. The next morning, I had just finished breakfast when there was another knock at the door. This time it was Patty, immaculately dressed in one of her real estate showing outfits, pearl earrings catching the light. "Mom," she said, breezing past, me into the house. "We need to talk about your finances." My finances, not her finances or Richard's finances, but mine. The money I'd earned running the hardware store after Thomas died. The savings I'd built while putting both children through college without a penny of debt. The investments I'd made that had outperformed the market 3 years running. "What about them?" I asked, following her into my own living room. "Richard? And I think it might be time to consider setting up a power of attorney," she said, opening her leather portfolio. "Just as a precaution, in case anything were to happen." "A precaution," I repeated. "Exactly." She smiled. "All professional. Efficiency. It's what responsible families do. Look at the Hendersons. Their mother ended up sending $20,000 to that email scammer. By the time they found out, the money was gone." I thought of Doris's warning. Joyce's children convinced her doctor she was showing signs of dementia. "I'll think about it," I said, the same answer I'd given Richard. Non-committal, buying time. "Great." Patty seemed relieved by my easy agreement. "I've already spoken with Warren Phillips. You remember him, Mom? Our family attorney? He's prepared all the documents. We just need your signature. Already spoken with Warren. Documents prepared. They weren't asking. They were informing me of decisions already made. I said I'll think about it, Patricia. I repeated, using her full name, the way I did when she was a child in trouble. Now, wasn't today your big showing at the lakefront property? You mentioned it 3 times when you called on Sunday. The diversion worked. Patty glanced at her. Watch? Exclaimed at the time and rushed off with promises to continue this conversation soon. As I watched her sleek BMW pull away from the curb, I wondered when my children had become strangers to me. When had they stopped listening to what I said and started only hearing what they expected an old woman to say? That afternoon, I visited the Riverdale Public Library, where I'd volunteered for the past 15 years. The head librarian, Margot, waved me over to the reference desk. Martha, perfect timing. We just got those large print mystery novels you ordered for the senior book club. I smiled, genuinely pleased. The book club had been my idea 3 years ago. What had started as 4 tentative readers had blossomed into a group of 16, with a waiting list. Wonderful. And how are the literacy students progressing with the new workbooks? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There, Margot began, but was interrupted by a familiar voice. Mrs. Wilson? What a surprise seeing you here. I turned to find Beth, my daughter-in-law, standing by the desk with a stack of gardening books. Beth, who had never shown interest in either libraries or gardening in all the years I'd known her. Hello, Beth. I volunteer here every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Have for years. I kept my voice pleasant, though suspicion flared. I didn't know you were interested in gardening. Oh, it's just a little project I'm thinking of starting, she said vaguely. Richard mentioned you might be here. He was worried when he called the house and you didn't answer. Called the house. On the landline I'd kept specifically because they insisted I needed it for emergencies. The landline I'd told them repeatedly that I rarely answered because of telemarketers. The landline right next to the calendar where I'd written library 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. in clear block letters. As you can see, I'm perfectly fine, I said, just doing my usual volunteer work. Beth nodded, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Of course, I'll let Richard know. He worries, you know. After she left, Margot raised an eyebrow. Everything okay, Martha? I considered confiding in her but decided against it. The fewer people who knew my concerns, the better. Everything's fine. Now tell me about the literacy students. That night, unable to sleep, I went to my study and opened my laptop, the buy. One Richard had insisted on buying me to stay connected, but clearly expected to gather dust. Little did he know I'd been researching investments online for years. I typed legal rights elderly parents into the search bar. The results were eye-opening. Stories of adult children seeking guardianship of their aging parents. Court cases where elders fought to maintain their independence. Statistics on elder, financial abuse by family members. And, most alarmingly, the legal process for declaring someone incompetent. According to multiple sources, all they would need was medical documentation of cognitive impairment and evidence that I couldn't make sound decisions or care for myself. With that, they could petition the court for guardianship, gaining control over my finances, my living situation, even my medical care. I felt sick. The whispers in the kitchen, the concerns about my memory, the sudden interest in my finances. The unexpected visits to check on me. They weren't just being overprotective, they were building their case. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting my garden in soft golden light, I made a decision. If they wanted to declare me incompetent, they'd have to prove it. And I wasn't going down without a fight. The first step was medical. I needed to know where I stood, not through Richard's hand-picked geriatrician who'd seen me exactly twice, but through a doctor of my choosing. I called Dr. Thomas Mitchell, a neurologist who'd treated Thomas during his illness years ago. He had since specialized in cognitive disorders in aging patients and had a reputation for both thoroughness and respect for patient autonomy. His receptionist initially said he wasn't taking new patients, but when I mentioned Thomas's name, she found an opening for the following week. One small victory. Next, I needed allies, not just friends who would sympathize, but people who could testify to my competence if necessary. I made a list. Margot from the library, Pastor Jim who consulted me on church finances, my bridge partners who trusted my strategic mind every Wednesday afternoon, and Eddie Harris, my neighbor of 40 years, whose blunt honesty would make him an excellent character witness. The third step was documentation. I started keeping a detailed journal of every interaction with Richard, Patty, or their spouses. Every comment about my memory, every suggestion about assisted living, every interference with my daily life. Dates, times, exact wording whenever possible. I also began taking daily photos of my home. Tidy, well-maintained, with fresh food in the refrigerator and all utilities functioning properly. If they were going to claim I couldn't care for myself, I would have evidence to the contrary. For 3 days, I maintained this careful documentation while going about my normal routine. Then, on Saturday morning, both my children arrived together, along with Beth and Patty's husband, Greg. An intervention, clearly. They sat in my living room, Richard and Patty on the sofa, their spouses in armchairs, facing me like a tribunal. On the coffee table between us lay more brochures, papers in legal folders, and a plate of store-bought cookies that Patty had brought, as if sweets might soften whatever blow they planned to deliver. "Mom," Richard began, after awkward, small talk about the weather had petered out. "We've been talking, and we all agree that it's time to make some changes." "Changes," I repeated, keeping my voice even. "For your safety and well-being," Patty added quickly. "We love you too much to ignore the signs." "What signs would those be?" I asked. They exchanged glances, as if they'd rehearsed this conversation, which, I realized with a stab of hurt, they probably had. "The confusion with your medications," Richard said. "The checkbook in the refrigerator," Patty continued. "The stove left on," Beth chimed in. "The missed appointments," Greg added, though he'd barely spoken 10 sentences to me in all the years he'd been married to my daughter. They continued, taking turns listing my supposed failures. Some were exaggerated versions of minor incidents. Others were completely fabricated or situations they themselves had caused. All were presented as evidence of my mental decline. I listened without interrupting, mentally recording each accusation for my journal. When they finally ran out of examples, Richard leaned forward, hands clasped in front of him. "Mom, we've made an appointment with Dr. Ramirez for Monday. He specializes in geriatric assessment. After that, we can all sit down with Warren Phillips to discuss the next steps for your care and finances." They had made medical appointments for me. They had consulted an attorney about my money. They had decided my future without once asking what I wanted. I could have argued, could have pointed out each falsehood in their litany of concerns, could have reminded them that I had raised them alone after their father died, had run a successful business, had been independent for longer than they'd been alive. Instead, I smiled. "I appreciate your concern. I do. But I've already made an appointment with Dr. Mitchell for Tuesday. I'd like his opinion before making any decisions." Their surprise was almost comical. They'd expected resistance, tears, or confusion, not calm, reasonable counterplanning. "Dr. Mitchell?" Patty frowned. "I don't know him." "He treated your father during his illness," I said. "He's now one of the top neurologists in the state, specializing in cognitive health in seniors." "But Dr. Ramirez is covered by your insurance," Richard protested. "I can afford the consultation," I replied. After all, it was my money they were so concerned about. After a tense back and forth, They reluctantly agreed to postpone their plans until after my appointment with Dr. Mitchell. As they left, I overheard Richard murmuring to Patty, "This might be good. An independent assessment will carry more weight." With the court. The court. So they were already thinking that far ahead. On Tuesday morning, Eddie Harris drove me to my appointment. At 88, he was still a confident driver and had offered immediately when I mentioned needing a ride. His wife June had passed 3 years earlier, and we'd developed a friendship based on shared grief and stubborn independence. "Those kids of yours," he grumbled as we drove. "June and I were lucky. Our David never tried telling us how to live our lives." "They think they're helping," I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced anymore. Eddie snorted. "Helping themselves, maybe. To your house and savings." I couldn't dismiss his cynicism entirely. The hardware store property alone was worth nearly $1 million in today's market, not counting the business itself, my investments, or the house I'd lived in for 45 years. Richard had made several comments recently about how that downtown location would be perfect for redevelopment. Dr. Mitchell's office was modern but comfortable, with none of the infantilizing decor I'd noticed in some medical facilities catering to seniors. No cartoonish signs or patronizing language, just dignified, accessible design. The assessment was thorough. Cognitive tests, memory evaluations, questions about my daily functioning. Dr. Mitchell asked about my medical history, medications, sleep patterns, and diet. He scheduled an MRI and blood work. Most importantly, he spoke directly to me, not to Eddie, who waited in the reception area. "I want comprehensive data before making any assessment," he explained. "Cognitive changes can have many causes. Some reversible, some manageable, some neither. But jumping to conclusions serves no one." I appreciated his methodical approach. Whatever the outcome, at least it would be based on science, not on my children's cherry-picked anecdotes. 3 days later, I returned for the results. This time I went alone, taking a taxi despite Richard's insistence that he should drive me. I needed to hear the truth without their filtering or influence. Dr. Mitchell welcomed me into his office, where brain scans were displayed on his computer screen. He gestured for me to sit. "Mrs. Wilson, I've reviewed all your test results," he began, his expression serious but not grave. My heart thumped painfully against my ribs. Despite my determination to fight my children's assumptions, I'd begun to wonder if they might be right. Perhaps there were changes I hadn't recognized in myself. Perhaps I was being stubborn rather than sensible. "And?" I prompted when he paused. "And I can find no evidence of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any other form of cognitive impairment." I blinked, relief washing over me like a wave. "None?" "Your cognitive test scores are above average for your age group. Your memory function shows normal age-related changes, but nothing pathological. Your problem-solving abilities are intact." He gestured to the brain scan. "There's no significant atrophy or vascular damage visible on your MRI." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "However," he continued, "I did find something concerning in your blood work." My relief faltered. "What is it?" "Your thyroid levels are severely abnormal. You're suffering from hypothyroidism. And based on these numbers, it's been untreated for some time. Hypothyroidism, not dementia, not Alzheimer's." "That could explain the fatigue you mentioned, the difficulty concentrating at times, even some memory fog," he explained. "Thyroid issues can mimic cognitive impairment, especially in older adults. The good news is it's treatable with medication." He wrote a prescription, explaining the dosage and potential side effects. "You should start feeling improvement within a few weeks, though it may take longer to find your optimal dose." As I left his office, prescription in hand, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that my mind was still my own, anger that my children had jumped to the worst conclusions, And a new worry. How would they react when their plans were thwarted? I was about to find out. Because when I stepped into the waiting room, I found not just Eddie, but Richard and Patty as well. Their expressions a mix of concern and suspicion. "Mom," Richard said, standing quickly, "we were worried when you didn't answer your phone. Eddie told us you were here." I glanced at Eddie, who shrugged apologetically. "They showed up at my house looking for you. What was I supposed to do? Lie?" "What did the doctor say?" Patty asked, her voice gentle but her eyes sharp. I looked between my children, these strangers who shared my blood but not my trust, and made a decision. Dr. Mitchell had given me more than a diagnosis today. He'd given me ammunition for the battle ahead. "Dr. Mitchell would like to speak with all of us," I said. "He's waiting in his office." As we walked back down the hallway, I could feel their anticipation. They thought this was the moment their concerns would be validated, the first step toward taking control of my life. They had no idea what was coming. Dr. Mitchell welcomed us into his office, gesturing for Richard and Patty to take the 2 chairs opposite his desk, while I settled into the one beside them. The brain scans were still displayed on his monitor, a maze of gray and white that apparently held the truth about my mind. "Mrs. Wilson has asked me to share her medical results with you," Dr. Mitchell began, his professional demeanor giving nothing away. "I understand you have concerns about her cognitive health." Richard leaned forward slightly. "Yes, we've noticed significant changes in her memory and decision-making over the past year." "She's been putting herself at risk," Patty added. "Forgetting medications, missing appointments." Dr. Mitchell nodded, his expression neutral as he listened. "I've conducted a comprehensive assessment of your mother's cognitive function. This included standardized tests, neuroimaging, and blood work." He turned his computer monitor so they could better see the brain scans. "This is your mother's MRI scan. I've been looking for signs of atrophy, vascular damage, or other abnormalities that might indicate dementia or similar conditions." My children stared at the images as if they could interpret the complex patterns themselves. Richard had always approached problems with unwarranted confidence, even as a child. "And," he prompted, "I can find no evidence of Alzheimer's disease or any other form of dementia," Dr. Mitchell stated firmly. "Mrs. Wilson's cognitive test scores are above average for her age group. Her memory function shows normal age-related changes, but nothing pathological." The silence that followed was profound. Richard blinked rapidly, while Patty's mouth opened slightly in surprise. "That can't be right," Richard finally said. "We've seen the changes, the confusion, the forgetfulness." Dr. Mitchell held up a hand. "I did, however, find something significant in her blood work." He pulled up another screen showing laboratory results. "Mrs. Wilson has severe hypothyroidism. Her thyroid hormone levels are drastically below normal range." "Hypothyroidism?" Patty repeated, sounding genuinely confused. "Yes. The thyroid gland regulates metabolism throughout the body, including brain function. When thyroid hormone levels drop significantly, it can cause fatigue, difficulty concentrating, memory issues, depression, and other symptoms that may mimic cognitive decline." Richard frowned. "But that doesn't explain— Actually, it explains quite a lot," Dr. Mitchell interrupted gently. "Untreated hypothyroidism can cause precisely the symptoms you've described. Fortunately, it's treatable with medication. I've prescribed levothyroxine, which should help restore normal hormone levels." He turned to me. "Mrs. Wilson should begin to notice improvements within a few weeks, though it may take several months to reach the optimal dosage and see full benefits." Patty looked stunned. "So, she's not developing dementia? Based on all available evidence, no," Dr. Mitchell confirmed. "Her cognitive functions are intact. The symptoms you've observed are most likely due to this medical condition, which is entirely treatable." The atmosphere in the room shifted. Richard's posture stiffened, while Patty seemed to deflate slightly. I couldn't tell if they were relieved or disappointed. I'd like to follow up in 6 weeks to check Mrs. Wilson's thyroid levels and assess her response to the medication, Dr. Mitchell continued, apparently oblivious to their reactions. Until then, I recommend maintaining her normal routine and activities. As we left his office, no one spoke. The silent elevator ride to the ground floor was excruciating. Only when we reached the parking lot did Richard finally clear his throat. Well, this is good news, I suppose. The hesitation in his voice told me everything I needed to know. Good news, but not for the plans they'd been making. Yes, I said simply, it is. Eddie, who had been waiting in his car, rolled down the window. Everything okay? Just fine, I called back, then turned to my children. Eddie's driving me home. We can talk more later. They looked ready to protest, but what could they say? The medical evidence was clear. For now, at least, their case for my incompetence had crumbled. In Eddie's car, I finally allowed myself to exhale fully. Hypothyroidism, I said, almost laughing with relief. All this time, it was just my thyroid. Eddie glanced over. So the doc gave you a clean bill of mental health, huh? Bet that threw a wrench in their plans. They looked so... I searched for the word. Confused. Like they couldn't quite process it. Course they couldn't, Eddie snorted. They'd already decided what was wrong with you. Facts that don't fit the narrative are mighty inconvenient. I gazed out the window as we drove through familiar streets. I don't understand it, Eddie. When did they start seeing me as a problem to solve, rather than a person to respect? Eddie was quiet for a moment. People do strange things when money and property get involved. Even good people. Even family. The truth of his words settled heavily in my chest. This wasn't simply about concern for my welfare. It was about my house, with its prime location and paid-off mortgage. About the hardware store property downtown. About investment accounts and life insurance policies. About who would control those assets and when. At home, I took my first thyroid pill with a glass of water, studying the small tablet as if it contained all the answers to my problems. In a way, it did. This medication was my evidence, my shield against their accusations. But for how long? Dr. Mitchell had vindicated me today, but what about tomorrow? What if the medication didn't work quickly enough? What if they found another reason, another concern to justify taking over my life? I needed to be proactive. The medical diagnosis had given me breathing room, but I couldn't afford to waste it. The next morning, I called Warren Phillips, our family attorney. If Richard and Patty had already consulted him about my competency, I needed to know exactly what they'd discussed. His secretary put me through immediately. "Martha, how lovely to hear from you. It's been too long." Warren had handled Thomas's will, our business matters, and various legal needs for over 30 years. His voice was warm with genuine affection. "Hello, Warren. I need to discuss something sensitive with you. Would today be possible?" He hesitated only briefly. "Of course. I have an opening at 3 if that works for you." "Perfect. And Warren, please don't mention this call to Richard or Patricia." Another pause. "I understand. 3 o'clock." I hung up, feeling a twinge of guilt for putting him in an awkward position. As our family attorney, he had worked with all of us. But my children had forced my hand by involving him in their plans without my knowledge. The law office was in a handsome brick building downtown, just 2 blocks from where our hardware store had stood. I'd sold the business when I retired, but kept ownership of the property, which now housed a thriving coffee shop and bookstore. Warren's office remained unchanged. Leather chairs, dark wood bookshelves, certificates on the walls. He rose to greet me, his handshake firm despite his 70 years. "Martha, wonderful to see you. You're looking well." I settled into the chair across from his desk. "Thank you, Warren. I'll get straight to the point. I believe my children, have consulted you about obtaining power of attorney over my affairs, possibly even guardianship." Warren's expression shifted subtly. He removed his glasses, polishing them with a handkerchief, a stalling tactic I'd observed many times during business negotiations. "You know I can't discuss other clients' concerns without their permission," he began carefully. "I'm not asking you to betray confidences, Warren. I'm asking you to advise me, as your client, about my legal rights in this situation." He replaced his glasses. "Fair enough. Speaking hypothetically, if adult children were concerned about an elderly parent's capacity, they might indeed seek legal counsel about protective measures. Such as power of attorney, which allows someone to make financial or healthcare decisions if the parent becomes unable to do so. Or guardianship, which is more comprehensive, but requires court involvement and proof of incapacity. And how would they prove incapacity? Typically through medical documentation, witness testimony about daily functioning, and evidence of harmful decision-making. He leaned forward slightly. "Martha, may I ask what prompted this inquiry?" I told him everything, the whispered conversations, the brochures for Golden Pines, the meetings with my children, and finally, Dr. Mitchell's diagnosis of hypothyroidism rather than dementia. Warren listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, he sighed deeply. "I see. This puts me in a difficult position ethically. I understand that. I'm not asking you to take sides in a family dispute. I'm asking for your professional guidance to protect my legal rights." He nodded slowly. "Then my advice is straightforward. First, get your advance directives in order. Durable power of attorney, healthcare proxy, living will. Choose someone you trust implicitly to make decisions if you truly become incapacitated. Not Richard or Patty?" Warren spread his hands. "That's entirely your decision. But given current circumstances, you might consider alternatives." I thought of Eddie, whose blunt honesty and respect for independence made him a far better advocate than my own children. "What else?" "Document everything. Keep copies of your medical records, especially Dr. Mitchell's assessment. Maintain a journal of daily activities that demonstrate your capability. And consider a formal capacity assessment by a geriatric psychiatrist, someone with expertise specifically in determining legal competence." "Even though Dr. Mitchell found no cognitive impairment?" "It provides another layer of documentation. The more evidence you have of your competence, the harder it would be for anyone to challenge it." I took notes as he continued outlining strategies, regular financial audits to prove sound management, witnesses to my daily functioning, even security cameras to document my ability to care for myself and my home. Before leaving, I asked one final question. "Warren, be honest with me. How serious were they about pursuing this?" He hesitated, ethical considerations clearly weighing against personal loyalty. Finally, he sighed. "Serious enough that I was concerned. But I hope, today's conversation has given you tools to address those concerns." I thanked him and left, walking slowly past the old hardware store. Through the window, I could see young people reading at small tables, sipping coffee where Thomas and I had once stacked paint cans and measured lengths of chain. Life moved forward, whether we were ready or not. At home, I found a message from Patty on my answering machine. "Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about what happened at the doctor's." I didn't call. Not yet. I needed time to implement Warren's advice first. That evening, I invited Eddie over for dinner. We sat on the back porch afterward, watching fireflies emerge as dusk settled over the garden. "I need to ask you something important," I said after explaining my conversation with Warren. "Would you be willing to serve as my power of attorney for healthcare decisions and financial matters if I truly become unable to manage them?" Eddie studied me for a long moment. "You sure about this? Your kids won't take it well." "I'm sure. You're the only person I trust to respect my wishes, even when they're difficult. He nodded slowly. Then yes? I'd be honored. We spent the next hour discussing my specific preferences, which treatments I would want or refuse, how my assets should be managed, even funeral arrangements. It was a conversation no one enjoys having, but it felt liberating to make these decisions myself rather than having them imposed upon me. The next day, I called Dr. Lydia Chen, a geriatric psychiatrist Warren had recommended. Her earliest available appointment was 3 weeks away, an eternity when I felt my autonomy hanging in the balance. But the thorough capacity assessment she offered would be worth the wait. In the meantime, I needed to address my children. Avoidance would only reinforce their belief that I couldn't handle difficult conversations. I invited them to Sunday dinner, something we'd done regularly when Thomas was alive, but had gradually abandoned as their lives grew busier. To my surprise, they both accepted immediately. They arrived together, as they had for the intervention, but their demeanor was markedly different, uncertain, almost contrite. Patty brought a homemade casserole rather than store-bought cookies. Richard carried a bouquet of lilies, my favorite. "The house looks nice, Mom," Patty commented as she helped me set the table. I nodded. It always does when it's properly cared for. She flinched slightly at the implied criticism but didn't respond. Dinner was stilted, conversation limited to safe topics. The weather, Patty's latest real estate listing, Richard's daughter Jennifer's college applications. Only when we moved to the living room with coffee did Richard finally address the elephant in the room. "Mom, about what happened at the doctor's office. We owe you an apology." It was more than I'd expected. I waited, giving him space to continue. "We were worried about you," he said. "The symptoms we saw, they really did concern us." "I understand concern," I replied evenly. "What I don't understand is why you consulted an attorney about taking control of my affairs without even discussing it with me first." They exchanged quick glances. "Who told you that?" Patty asked. "Does it matter? It's true, isn't it?" Richard sighed, shoulders slumping slightly. "We talked to Warren about options, that's all. We never filed any papers." "But you were planning to, using Dr. Ramirez's assessment as evidence." "We wanted to be prepared," Patty insisted. "If the assessment showed significant cognitive decline, we needed to know what steps to take." "Steps like selling my house, moving me to Golden Pines, taking over my finances?" Richard leaned forward. "Mom, try to see it from our perspective. You've been living alone since Dad died. This house is too big for one person. Your memory seemed to be slipping. We were scared." "Scared for me, or scared of what would happen to your inheritance if I made decisions you didn't approve of?" The words hung in the air, harsh but honest. Patty's eyes widened. "That's not fair," she protested. "This was never about money." "Wasn't it? Richard, how many times have you mentioned that my downtown property would be perfect for redevelopment? Patty, wasn't it you who suggested I might be taken advantage of by some scammer?" They had no ready response. In the silence, I continued more gently. "I understand fear. I've been afraid too. Afraid of losing my independence. Afraid of becoming a burden. But I've never stopped being a person capable of making my own choices." Richard ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Thomas that it made my heart ache. "We never meant to take your choices away, Mom. We just wanted to protect you. By making decisions for me rather than with me. By gathering evidence against me rather than talking to me about your concerns." Patty's eyes filled with tears. "We made mistakes, bad ones. But please believe we thought we were doing the right thing." Perhaps they had. Perhaps their intentions had truly been good, their methods misguided. Or perhaps they'd cloaked self-interest in the language of concern. Either way, we needed to move forward. "I've made some decisions I want to share with you," I said. First, I've appointed Eddie Harris as my power of attorney for both healthcare and financial matters. Their shock was immediate. "Eddie?" Richard exclaimed. "But he's older than you are." "He's also my most trusted friend and respects my wishes. If he becomes unable to serve, my backup is Margot Fleming from the library." "Not us," Patty said. Quietly. It wasn't a question. "No, not you." Richard stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "This is because of one mistake? One misunderstanding about your health?" "It's because you were willing to declare me incompetent rather than have an honest conversation about your concerns," I replied calmly. "It's because you went behind my back to Warren. It's because you see me as a problem to manage rather than a person to respect." "That's not true," Patty protested weakly. "Isn't it? When was the last time either of you asked about my dreams, my fears, my wishes for the future? Not as your mother who needs care, but as Martha Wilson, a person with my own identity beyond motherhood." They were silent, perhaps searching their memories for conversations that had never happened. "Second," I continued, "I'm scheduling a formal capacity assessment with Dr. Chen, a geriatric psychiatrist. This will provide documented evidence of my competence that can't be disputed." Richard returned to his seat. "Mom, that's not necessary. We believe Dr. Mitchell." "It's not about what you believe. It's about protecting myself legally." "From us?" Patty asked, hurt evident in her voice. "From anyone who might challenge my right to make my own decisions." "We wouldn't do that now," Richard insisted. "Not after knowing about the thyroid condition." I studied my son's face, the boy I'd raised, the man he'd become. "Then you have nothing to worry about, do you? The assessment will simply confirm what Dr. Mitchell already found." They didn't argue further, perhaps recognizing the determination in my voice, or perhaps simply unsure how to navigate this new dynamic between us. "Third," I said, "I'm hiring Gloria Ramirez to help with housekeeping twice a week. Not because I need assistance, but because I choose to spend my time on activities I enjoy rather than vacuuming." This practical announcement seemed to ease some tension. Patty even nodded approval. "Gloria's excellent. She helps several of my clients." And finally, I expect to be included in any discussions about my care, my finances, or my living situation. No more secret meetings, no more plans made without my knowledge. Richard and Patty exchanged glances before Richard spoke. "That's entirely fair. We should have done that from the beginning." The conversation shifted to logistics, my medication, schedule, upcoming appointments with Dr. Mitchell, the search for a pill organizer that would actually be easier for my arthritic fingers, mundane details that somehow felt like progress. When they left that evening, I felt cautiously optimistic. Bridges hadn't been fully rebuilt, but neither had they been permanently burned. Trust would take longer to restore, but at least we were speaking honestly. Over the next 2 weeks, I began to notice subtle changes as the thyroid medication took effect. The persistent fatigue that had clouded my days began to lift. My thinking felt sharper, more focused. Even small tasks like organizing my recipe box or balancing my checkbook became easier. Dr. Mitchell had been right. The symptoms that had concerned my children, and if I was honest, sometimes concerned me as well, were improving with treatment. The fog was lifting, revealing the clearer-thinking Martha who had been there all along, just obscured by medical factors beyond my control. I maintained my journal, documenting these improvements alongside my daily activities. I asked Eddie to witness my financial management, signing a statement confirming he'd observed me reviewing investments and paying bills correctly. I requested written statements from Margot about my continued competence at the library, and from Pastor Jim about my contributions to church committee decisions, building a case for myself, as Warren had advised, preparing defenses against attacks that might never come. The day of my appointment with Dr. Chen arrived. Eddie drove me to her office, a warm, inviting space with none of the clinical sterility I'd expected. My goal today is to assess your capacity for decision-making, she explained after introductions. This isn't about diagnosing medical conditions. Dr. Mitchell has already addressed that. This is about determining whether you can understand information relevant to decisions, appreciate the situation and its consequences, reason about treatment options, and communicate your choice. The assessment was even more comprehensive than Dr. Mitchell's had been. Cognitive tests, of course, but also practical scenarios that evaluated my judgment. Questions about my values and how they informed my choices. Discussions about risk assessment and long-term planning. You're doing very well, Dr. Chen commented as we neared the end of the 3-hour evaluation. Your cognitive functions are intact, and your decision-making capacity is sound. I felt relief wash over me. So, if someone challenged my competence in court, based on today's assessment, I would testify that you demonstrate full capacity to make your own financial, medical, and living arrangement decisions. She smiled kindly. Mrs. Wilson, may I ask why you requested this evaluation? Most people come here because someone else has questioned their capacity. My children tried to declare me incompetent, I said simply. I needed evidence to protect myself. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Unfortunately, that's not uncommon. Many families struggle with shifting dynamics as parents age. Dr. Mitchell found I have hypothyroidism, not dementia. The medication is already helping. She nodded. Excellent. Untreated hypothyroidism can certainly cause symptoms that mimic cognitive decline. I'm glad you received proper diagnosis and treatment. As she walked me out, she added, My written assessment will be ready next week. It should provide the documentation you need, though I hope you won't need to use it in court. So do I replied, but better prepared than vulnerable. Eddie was waiting in the reception area, thumbing through a fishing magazine. How'd it go? She said I have full capacity, I told him as we walked to the car. Written assessment next week. Never doubted it for a minute, he said gruffly. Those kids of yours just weren't looking closely enough. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps Richard and Patty had seen what they expected to see, an aging mother, whose occasional forgetfulness confirmed their fears rather than reflecting normal changes or treatable medical conditions. Or perhaps they had seen what was convenient to see. A mother whose decline justified intervention that might also give them access to assets they felt entitled to inherit. The truth probably lay somewhere in between. Genuine concern mixed. With self-interest, love complicated by impatience, fear expressed as control. As Eddie drove through familiar streets toward home, I found myself wondering about the future. The medical diagnosis and capacity assessment had provided immediate protection. But what about the long term? How would we rebuild trust? How would we navigate aging and eventual decline when that day truly came? The hardest conversations still lay ahead. But for the first time in months, I felt equipped to face them, not as a mother defending her autonomy, but as Martha Wilson, a woman with agency, dignity, and voice. My phone rang just as we pulled into my driveway, Richard's number. I answered, hearing unusual tension in his greeting. Mom, are you home? Patty and I need to talk to you. It's important. The timing was suspicious, immediately after my capacity assessment. Had they somehow learned about the appointment? Were they planning another intervention? I just got home, I replied cautiously. What's this about? It's better discussed in person. We'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up before I could respond. Eddie raised an eyebrow in question. Richard and Patty are coming over. They say it's important. Want me to stick around? He offered. Moral support? I considered it but shook my head. No, whatever this is, I need to handle it myself. Call if you need me, he said, squeezing my hand briefly before driving away. Inside, I made fresh coffee and arranged cookies. On a plate, normal preparations for visitors that somehow felt like fortifying defenses. Whatever new challenge they were bringing, I would meet it head on. The doorbell rang precisely 18 minutes later. Through the window, I could see not just Richard and Patty's cars, but a third I didn't recognize, a sleek black sedan with rental plates. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to find my children accompanied by a woman I'd never seen before. Tall, professionally dressed with a leather portfolio under her arm. "Mom," Richard said, his expression unreadable. "This is Simone Parker. She's a senior care consultant from Boston. We'd like you to hear what she has to say." I regarded the stranger, standing on my porch with wary curiosity. Another expert brought in to assess me? After everything we'd discussed? The disappointment must have shown on my face, because Patty quickly stepped forward. "Mom, it's not what you think. Please just hear her out." Pride urged me to send them away, but wisdom suggested listening first. I stepped back, gesturing them inside. "The coffee's fresh." We settled in the living room, the consultant, Simone, perching on the edge of the sofa with perfect posture. Up close, I noticed she was older than I'd initially thought, perhaps in her 60s, with elegant silver streaks in her dark hair. "Mrs. Wilson, thank you for seeing me," she began, her voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't quite place. "Your children have shared some of your recent experiences, and I'd like to offer a different perspective, if I may." I nodded guardedly, waiting. "I specialize in helping families navigate transitions as parents age, not by taking control away from seniors, but by creating collaborative plans that preserve dignity and independence while addressing real concerns." It sounded rehearsed, like a sales pitch. I glanced at Richard, who was watching me intently. "We realize we handled things badly, Mom," he said. "Ms. Parker works with families like ours, where everyone wants what's best but can't agree on what that means." Simone opened her portfolio, removing several documents. "Mrs. Wilson, from what your children tell me, you're a fiercely independent woman who values self-sufficiency. You raised your children alone after your husband's death, ran a successful business, and continue to contribute to your community through volunteering." The accurate assessment surprised me. Perhaps they had been listening after all. "I also understand you've recently been diagnosed with hypothyroidism, which was causing symptoms that mimicked cognitive decline." "Yes," I confirmed. "The medication is already helping." "Excellent. Medical intervention makes such a difference." She paused. "But even with treatment, aging brings challenges. The goal isn't to deny those challenges, but to address them proactively, on your terms." My skepticism must have shown, because she smiled gently. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm not here to convince you to move to assisted living or hand over control of your finances. I'm here to facilitate a conversation about creating a sustainable plan for your ongoing independence. One that includes safeguards you design, not ones imposed upon you." It was a compelling approach, I had to admit, but trust, once damaged, doesn't rebuild easily. "And if I'm not interested in such a conversation, then I thank you for the coffee and wish you well." She closed her portfolio. "My role is to offer resources and facilitate dialogue, not to pressure anyone." Richard leaned forward. "Mom, we know we broke your trust. We're trying to repair that damage. Ms. Parker has helped families like ours find middle ground." "And who's paying for this consultation?" I asked pointedly. "We are," Patty said, "but she doesn't work for us. She works for the family unit, helping everyone's needs be heard and respected. I studied them, my children who had conspired behind my back just weeks ago, now offering an olive branch of sorts. Was it genuine, or another strategy to achieve their original aims? What exactly would this process involve? I asked finally. Simone reopened her portfolio. 3 facilitated family meetings, typically. In the first, everyone shares their concerns and priorities, both the adult children and the parent. In the second, We explore options that address those concerns while respecting the parent's autonomy. In the third, we create a written family agreement about moving forward. And if we can't agree, then at least everyone has been fully heard and all options explored openly. That alone often improves the situation, even without formal agreement. It was reasonable, more reasonable than I'd expected. Still, caution seemed prudent. "I'd like time to consider this," I said, "and I'd want my friend Eddie Harris to participate in any meetings. He's my designated power of attorney now." Richard flinched slightly at the reminder, but Simone nodded. Without hesitation. "Family meetings can include anyone you consider family, by blood or by choice. Mr. Harris would be welcome." She handed me her business card. "Take whatever time you need to decide. Your children have my contact information if you wish to proceed." As they prepared to leave, Simone asked to use the restroom. Patty directed her down the hall, leaving me momentarily alone with Richard. "This isn't a trap, Mom," he said quietly. We realized how wrong our approach was. This is our attempt to do better. I wanted to believe him. Despite everything, these were still my children whom I'd raised and loved. "I'll think about it." After they left, I called Eddie to update him. He was skeptical, but not dismissive. "Could be legitimate," he conceded. "Could also be a more sophisticated way to get what they want. This Simone person sounds polished. She is, very professional, very reasonable. Wouldn't hurt to check her credentials. Got her full name?" I read it from her card. Simone Parker, MSW, Senior Life Transitions Consultant. "I'll ask David to look her up online," Eddie offered, referring to his son who lived in Boston. "If she's legitimate, he'll find her website, credentials, that sort of thing." I agreed, hanging up with a promise to call him the next day. Then I sat in my garden, watching bees navigate the lavender bushes as I considered this new development. Part of me wanted to refuse on principle. They had gone behind my back again, hiring a consultant without consulting me first. Yet this felt different, less controlling, more conciliatory. And frankly, having a neutral third party facilitate difficult conversations might be exactly what we needed. That evening I received a text from Patty. "No pressure about Ms. Parker. Just wanted you to know we're trying to find a better way forward. Love you, Mom." The simple message touched me more than I expected. Perhaps there was hope for understanding after all. The next afternoon, Eddie called with his findings. "According to David, this Simone Parker checks out. Licensed social worker, specializes in elder care mediation, has a practice in Boston, good reviews online. Been doing this work for 15 years. So she's legitimate." "Seems to be." He paused. "Question is, do you want to do this family meeting thing?" I considered the alternatives. Continue the standoff with my children, maintaining defenses against attacks that might never come, or engage in a structured process that might rebuild trust and communication? "I think I do," I said finally. "With you there, of course." "Of course?" he echoed. "Those kids of yours better be sincere about this." I hoped they were. The next day, I called Richard and agreed to try Simone's process, with several conditions. Meetings would be held at my home, Eddie would participate fully, and I could end the process at any time if I felt it wasn't productive. Richard agreed immediately. "That's completely fair, Mom. Thank you for being willing to try." The first meeting was scheduled for the following week. In preparation, Simone sent materials for everyone to review, questions to consider in advance, ground rules for communication, and a clear outline of the process. As I read through them, I was impressed by the thoughtfulness of the approach. The questions weren't just about practical matters like housing and healthcare, but about deeper considerations. What does independence mean to each of us? What fears motivate our positions? What values do we want to honor in our decisions? The day of the meeting arrived cool and clear, perfect for the garden gathering I'd arranged. Eddie arrived early, helping me set up chairs and a small table, with refreshments in the shade of the old maple tree. "Nice touch," he commented. "Hard to be too confrontational surrounded by flowers." Richard and Patty arrived precisely on time, followed shortly by Simone. After brief greetings, we settled into our chairs in a rough circle. The garden offered a tranquility that seemed to ease everyone's initial tension. Simone began by reviewing the ground rules. One person speaks at a time, no interrupting, focus on I statements rather than accusations, commitment to listen with an open mind. Then she turned to me. "Mrs. Wilson, since this is your home and these discussions center around your life, would you like to start by sharing your perspective?" I had prepared for this moment, thinking carefully about what I wanted to convey. I've been independent all my adult life. After Thomas died, I raised 2 children alone while running a business. I've made my own decisions, solved my own problems, and built a life I'm proud of. A gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes Thomas had hung decades ago, their melody punctuating my words. When you began making plans for my care without consulting me, discussing my finances with Warren, scheduling appointments with doctors I hadn't chosen, researching facilities I had no interest in, it felt like a betrayal. Not just of my trust, but of my personhood. As if I had suddenly become invisible in discussions about my own life. Richard shifted uncomfortably, but neither he nor Patty interrupted. "I understand you were concerned. The hypothyroidism was causing real symptoms that worried you. But your response wasn't to talk with me about those concerns. It was to talk about me, around me, without me." I paused, gathering my thoughts. What I want is respect for my autonomy. Collaboration rather than control. Recognition that even as I age, I remain the primary decision-maker in my life. Simone nodded encouragingly. "Thank you for that clarity, Mrs. Wilson. Richard or Patty? Would one of you like to share next?" Patty glanced at Richard, who nodded for her to go ahead. She took a deep breath. "Mom, first I want to say I'm sorry. Not just for how we handled things, but for how it made you feel." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "I was scared. When I found your checkbook in the refrigerator, when you missed appointments we'd written on your calendar, when the stove was left on, I didn't see an independent woman making choices. I saw my mother potentially in danger." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "But I didn't talk to you about it. I talked to Richard, to Greg, even to Warren. Everyone except the person who mattered most." Her voice caught slightly. I think I was afraid you'd dismiss my concerns, so I built a case instead of having a conversation." It was more self-awareness than I'd expected from Patty, who had always been quick to justify her actions. Richard spoke next, his usual confidence muted. "I've been thinking a lot about why we handled this so badly. Part of it was genuine worry. But if I'm honest, part of it was also convenience." Eddie raised an eyebrow, and Richard continued with visible discomfort. "It's easier to make decisions for someone than to support them in making their own decisions. Faster, more efficient." He grimaced. "I handle problems for a living. I identify issues, develop solutions, implement them. I treated your aging like a business problem to solve, not a life transition to navigate together." The admission hung in the air, remarkable in its honesty. "And there's another factor," he added reluctantly. "I've never seen you as vulnerable before. You were always the strong one, always in control. Seeing signs of what I thought was cognitive decline. It scared me badly. I reacted to that fear by trying to take control." Simone turned to Eddie. "Mr. Harris, would you like to share your perspective as Martha's friend and advocate?" Eddie cleared his throat. "I've known Martha for 40 years. Watched her run that hardware store, raise these 2, serve on every committee in town. Never met a stronger woman." He glanced at Richard and Patty. Your mother isn't just independent, she's resourceful, always has been. When problems come up, she finds solutions. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. This medical issue with her thyroid, that's just another problem to solve. And she's solving it, getting treatment, making adjustments. That's what she does. She doesn't need managing, she needs respect. Simone guided us through more discussion, skillfully keeping the conversation productive when emotions threatened to derail it. By the end of 2 hours, each of us had spoken honestly about our fears, priorities, and hopes for the future. As Simone prepared to leave, she summarized what she'd heard. I'm hearing some common ground. Everyone values Martha's independence and dignity. Everyone wants safety and appropriate support. The disagreement seems to be about how to balance those goals and who should make the decisions. She assigned homework for our next meeting. Each of us was to write down specific concerns about my current living situation, along with potential solutions that would respect my autonomy while addressing those concerns. After they left, Eddie stayed to help me put away the garden chairs. That went better than I expected, he admitted. Those kids of yours actually listened. Yes, I agreed, surprised myself. They did. Of course, talking is one thing. Follow through is another. He was right. One conversation, however productive, wouldn't rebuild the trust that had been damaged. That would take time and consistent effort from all of us. The next morning brought unexpected news. The hospital called to reschedule my 6-week follow-up. With Dr. Mitchell, he had been called away for a family emergency and would be unavailable for at least a month. We can schedule you with Dr. Ramirez instead, the receptionist offered. He has an opening next Tuesday. Dr. Ramirez, the very doctor my children had wanted me to see initially, the one they'd hoped would support their case for my incompetence. I hesitated, instinctively wary. Mrs. Wilson? Are you still there? I made a quick decision. Yes, that's fine. Tuesday with Dr. Ramirez. After hanging up, I considered the implications. If Dr. Ramirez had been chosen by my children specifically because they thought he would support their agenda, seeing him now could be risky. But the alternative, waiting over a month to check my thyroid levels, wasn't ideal either. And perhaps it was time to confront this situation directly rather than avoiding it. I called Eddie to let him know the change in plans. Want me to come with you? He offered immediately. Yes, I decided. I think that would be wise. The week passed quietly. I continued taking my thyroid medication, noticing steady improvement in my energy and mental clarity. I worked on my homework from Simone, listing my own concerns about aging in place, the steep basement stairs when laundry needed washing, the shower without grab bars, the difficulty of winter maintenance as snow and ice made the walkways treacherous. For each concern, I identified potential solutions that would maintain my independence. Converting the first-floor study into a laundry room, installing safety features in the bathroom, hiring neighborhood teenagers for snow shoveling. Practical. Adjustments that acknowledge challenges without surrendering autonomy. Tuesday arrived crisp and bright. Eddie picked me up promptly at 9, and we drove to Riverdale Medical Center in comfortable silence. The waiting room was crowded, mostly with younger patients, parents with fussy children, adults on lunch breaks from nearby offices. Eddie and I found seats in the corner, away from the busy reception desk. After a 30-minute wait, a nurse called my name and led us to an exam room. Eddie settled into the visitor's chair while I answered the nurse's preliminary questions about my medication and any symptoms. She checked my vitals, made notes in the computer, and promised the doctor would be in shortly. When the door opened, again I braced myself for confrontation. To my surprise, Dr. Ramirez was younger than I'd imagined, perhaps in his mid-40s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. Mrs. Wilson, I'm Dr. Ramirez. It's nice to meet you. He shook my hand, then Eddie's before consulting the chart on his tablet. I see you're following up on hypothyroidism diagnosed by Dr. Mitchell. How have you been feeling on the levothyroxine? His approach was straightforward and respectful, with none of the condescension I'd feared. I described my improved symptoms, the gradual return of energy, the lifting of the mental fog that had concerned my children. "That's excellent progress," he said, reviewing my latest lab results. "Your TSH is still higher than optimal, but moving in the right direction. We'll need to increase your dosage slightly to get you into the target range." He explained the adjustment, potential side effects, and timeline for improvement. Then, instead of rushing to the next patient, he set his tablet aside and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Wilson, forgive me if this seems intrusive, but I understand there was some concern about possible cognitive issues before your thyroid diagnosis. How has that situation evolved?" The question was unexpected, but not unwelcome. "My children misinterpreted symptoms of hypothyroidism as dementia," I replied carefully. "They were quite proactive in their response." A diplomatic understatement that Eddie acknowledged with a subtle snort. Dr. Ramirez nodded thoughtfully. "Hypothyroidism can certainly mimic cognitive decline, especially in older adults. It's a common misunderstanding." He glanced at his tablet again. "I notice your son attempted to schedule a geriatric assessment with me several weeks ago, but you didn't come to that appointment." "I wasn't consulted about it," I said simply. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "I see. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you received an accurate diagnosis from Dr. Mitchell. Left untreated, hypothyroidism can cause significant problems beyond the symptoms you've already experienced, including cognitive symptoms that could be mistaken for dementia," Eddie asked pointedly. "Absolutely. Brain fog, memory issues, confusion, all can result from untreated thyroid dysfunction." He wrote something on a prescription pad. "Mrs. Wilson, if you don't mind my asking, have you had a formal cognitive assessment since your thyroid diagnosis?" "Yes, with Dr. Chen, a geriatric psychiatrist. She found no evidence of cognitive impairment." He smiled. "Excellent. That's thorough." "Kare." He handed me the prescription. "Here's your adjusted dosage. We'll check levels again in 6 weeks, then likely every 6 months after that, assuming things stabilize." As we prepared to leave, I asked the question that had been nagging at me. "Dr. Ramirez, had I come to that appointment my son scheduled, what would your approach have been?" He considered the question carefully. "I would have done a standard geriatric assessment, which would have included blood work that likely would have revealed your thyroid condition. But I never begin with the assumption that memory issues in older adults are automatically dementia. There are too many other potential causes that need to be ruled out first." It was reassuring to hear, though it didn't erase my wariness completely. As Eddie and I left the medical center, I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief at the continued improvement in my health, lingering caution about my children's intentions, and growing confidence in my ability to navigate this challenging terrain. "He seemed decent enough," Eddie commented as we drove home. "Not the villain I was expecting." "No," I agreed. "Though that doesn't mean Richard and Patty weren't hoping for a different outcome from that original appointment." "True enough. People tend to find what they're looking for." He glanced over. "Speaking of which, ready for round 2 with Simone tomorrow?" I nodded. The second family meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon, again in my garden, if weather permitted. "I've done my homework. Have you?" "Wrote down exactly what I think they should and shouldn't be involving themselves in when it comes to your life," he confirmed. Didn't mince words either. I smiled at that. Eddie's bluntness was one of his most valuable qualities as an advocate. He would say the uncomfortable truths others might dance around. That evening, I reviewed my notes for the upcoming meeting, adding details from my appointment with Dr. Ramirez. The increased medication dosage, the continued improvement in symptoms, the confirming opinions from multiple medical professionals, all evidence that the original crisis had been largely medical, not cognitive. and was being appropriately addressed. The next day dawned overcast but dry, suitable for our garden meeting. As I arranged chairs under the maple tree, I noticed new buds forming on my rose bushes, the heritage varieties Thomas and I had planted decades ago, still thriving with proper care and occasional pruning. A fitting metaphor for my own condition. Perhaps. Eddie arrived early again, this time bearing a thermos of coffee. Strong enough to stand a spoon in, as he put it. We reviewed our notes together, comparing concerns and solutions. His list was more direct than mine, with items like, they don't get to decide where she lives, period, and medical decisions are hers to make, not theirs to manage. Richard and Patty arrived together, followed moments later by Simone. After brief greetings, we settled into our circle, more comfortable with the process this time. Simone began by asking each of us to share our homework, the specific concerns we'd identified and potential solutions we'd considered. I went first, presenting my thoughtful analysis of the challenges I faced aging in place and the practical modifications that could address them. I'm not denying there are issues to consider, I concluded. I'm simply asserting my right to identify those issues myself and participate fully in developing solutions. Patty went next. Her list surprisingly aligned with mine in many ways. She had concerns about the house maintenance, my ability to get help quickly in an emergency, transportation as my night vision decreased. But rather than jumping to assisted living as the only solution, she had researched home modifications, medical alert systems, and transportation services for seniors. I still worry, she admitted. But I understand now that there are ways to address those worries without disrupting your whole life. Richard's list was more focused on financial matters, ensuring bills were paid on time, protecting against scams and exploitation, planning for potential long-term care needs. But he, too, had shifted from control to collaboration in his proposed solutions. I've been researching something called supported decision-making, he explained. It's an alternative to guardianship that provides assistance while preserving autonomy. Essentially, you'd retain all your legal rights, but have access to support for complex decisions when needed. The concept was new to me, but immediately appealing. It acknowledged the potential need for assistance without removing my authority to make my own choices. Eddie's contribution was characteristically straightforward. Martha needs 3 things, he said. Respect for her decisions, practical help with tasks that are becoming difficult, and protection from anyone, family included, who might try to override her wishes. Simone guided us through comparing our lists, identifying areas of agreement, and points of potential conflict. To my surprise, there was considerable overlap in our concerns, if not always in our preferred solutions. This is excellent progress, she noted as we wrapped up the second hour of discussion. For our final meeting next week, I'd like each of you to consider what commitments you're willing to make to support this new understanding. What specific actions will you take, or refrain from taking, to demonstrate respect for Martha's autonomy while addressing legitimate concerns? As they prepared to leave, Richard hung back, asking for a moment alone. When the others had moved inside, he turned to me with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you. Something I didn't want to bring up during the formal meeting." My guard instantly rose. "What is it?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father that it made my heart ache briefly. "I've been offered a position in Chicago, a significant promotion, but it would mean moving the family. Chicago? Nearly 800 miles away. Too far for weekend visits or quick check-ins. Too far to oversee my care directly, should I need it." "When would this happen?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. 4 months from now, if I accept. Beth is researching schools for the kids, neighborhoods that might work for us. I studied his face, trying to understand what he wasn't saying. "And how does this relate to our current discussions about my care?" He sighed, looking away. I think it's part of why I panicked about your situation. The timing of noticing your symptoms, getting this job offer. I started imagining worst-case scenarios. What if you developed serious problems while I was too far away to help? What if decisions needed to be made quickly and I couldn't be here? The admission shifted my understanding of his behavior. Not just control for control's sake, but fear of being unable to fulfill what he saw as his responsibilities from a distance. I see, I said quietly. Have you discussed this with Patty? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. I appreciated that at least. Richard, your career matters. Your family's opportunities matter. You shouldn't make decisions based solely on my situation. But you're my mother, he protested. I have responsibilities to you too. Yes, you do. But those responsibilities don't include sacrificing your own life or managing mine from afar. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. Maybe this is exactly why we need the kind of planning we're doing with Simone, to develop systems that work regardless of where you live. He nodded slowly. I hadn't thought of it that way. Take the job if it's right for you and your family, I said firmly. We'll figure out the rest. After he left, I sat alone in the garden, processing this new information. Richard's potential move added urgency to our discussions, but it also clarified the stakes. Whatever arrangements we made needed to function whether my children lived nearby or across the country. That evening, as I prepared for bed, my phone rang. It was Patty, her voice tense. Mom, Richard just told me about Chicago. We need to talk about what this means for your care. So much for him discussing it with me first. He only mentioned it to me this afternoon, Patty. What? He didn't tell me that. I assumed. She paused. Never mind. The point is, this changes everything. If he moves, the burden of looking after you falls entirely on me. The word burden stung, though I knew she hadn't meant it cruelly. Patty, let's discuss this at our next meeting with Simone. That's what this process is for, planning for exactly these kinds of situations. But Mom, please, I interrupted. Firmly. I need time to think, and we all need Simone's guidance for this conversation. After a moment, she reluctantly agreed. Fine. But I'm worried, Mom. Really worried. After we hung up, I called Eddie to update him on this new development. His reaction was predictably blunt. Figures. The minute there's real responsibility. The boy runs off to Chicago. He huffed in frustration. Though I suppose 800 miles of distance might make him less likely to interfere in your decisions. It complicates things, I acknowledged. But maybe it also clarifies what we're really planning for. My independence with appropriate supports, not dependence on my children's direct oversight. True enough, and you've got me right next door for whatever that's worth. It was worth a great deal, I realized. Eddie's steady presence had become a cornerstone of my support system, his loyalty and respect a counterbalance to my children's well-intentioned but often misguided concerns. The week before our final meeting with Simone brought unexpected developments. First, Dr. Chen's written capacity assessment arrived, confirming in formal language what she had told me in person. I demonstrated full capacity for independent decision-making across all domains, financial, medical, and personal. Then, a letter came from Warren Phillips, our family attorney. It was addressed to me alone, marked confidential. Inside, he provided detailed information about legal options for preserving my autonomy while establishing appropriate safeguards, exactly what I had asked for during our meeting. But there was also a personal note. Martha, I want you to know that Richard and Patty came to see me yesterday. They asked me to draft new documents designating Eddie Harris as your healthcare proxy and establishing a supported decision-making agreement rather than a power of attorney. I thought you should be aware of this development before our next steps. I read the note twice, hardly believing the words. My children, who had once consulted Warren about taking control of my affairs, were now asking him to formalize my chosen arrangements instead. It was a remarkable shift, perhaps the first concrete evidence that our discussions with Simone were bearing fruit. The final meeting was held indoors due to rain. We gathered in my living room, the coffee table laid with refreshments and the documents each of us had prepared detailing our commitments moving forward. Simone opened the session by acknowledging the new circumstance we were addressing. I understand there's been a development regarding Richard's potential relocation. This gives us an opportunity to ensure our plan works regardless of geographic proximity. She turned to me. Martha, would you like to begin by sharing the commitments you're prepared to make? I nodded, referring to my notes. I commit to maintaining my health by taking medications as prescribed and keeping medical appointments. I will accept appropriate help with tasks that have become difficult, including hiring services when needed. I paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. I also commit to regular, honest communication about changes in my condition or circumstances. No hiding problems out of pride or fear. It was an important concession on my part, acknowledging that independence didn't mean refusing all assistance or concealing difficulties. Richard went next. I commit to respecting Mom's decisions about her living situation and care, even if I would choose differently. I will offer information and support, but not pressure or control. He took a deep breath. If I accept the position in Chicago, I commit to maintaining regular contact through video calls and visits as often as possible. I will not use distance as an excuse to exclude Mom from family events or decisions. Patty followed. I commit to communicating directly with Mom about concerns rather than discussing them with others first. I will ask how I can help rather than assuming what she needs. She glanced at Richard. And I commit to not resenting my brother if his move means I have more direct responsibility for being available to Mom when needed. The last commitment clearly cost her, but its honesty was important. Resentment left. Unacknowledged would only fester. Eddie completed the circle. I commit to supporting Martha's independence while watching out for her welfare. I'll speak up when I see problems, but I'll respect her right to make her own choices, even risky ones. He fixed Richard and Patty with a stern look. And I commit to being her advocate against anyone who tries to override her wishes, including you two, if necessary. Simone guided us through discussing each commitment, refining language, and addressing potential conflicts or gaps. By the end of 2 hours, we had developed a comprehensive family agreement that balanced respect for my autonomy with practical supports for aging safely in place. The document included specific actions each person would take, boundaries all agreed to respect, and processes for addressing new concerns as they arose. It wasn't legally binding, but it represented a moral commitment from each of us, a roadmap for navigating the challenging terrain ahead. As Simone prepared to leave, she offered a final observation. Family relationships are constantly evolving. This agreement isn't carved in stone. It's a living document that will need revisiting as circumstances change. The important thing is that you've established a foundation of mutual respect and clear communication for those future conversations. After she left, the 4 of us remained in the living room, a moment of shared accomplishment hanging in the air. It wasn't perfect harmony. Too much had happened for that. But it was a beginning, a framework for rebuilding trust, one decision at a time. Richard broke the silence. I accepted the Chicago position yesterday. We'll be moving in July. I nodded, having expected this. Congratulations. It's a wonderful opportunity for you and the family. Patty reached for my hand. We'll make this work, Mom, even with him abandoning us for the Windy City. Her tone was light, the joke masking real anxiety but not bitterness. Eddie snorted. Chicago's overrated. Too much wind, too much crime, too much of that deep dish monstrosity they call pizza. The tension broke as Richard laughed. "I'll remember that when I'm sending you all tickets to visit." As they prepared to leave, I felt a curious mix of emotions: relief that we had navigated this difficult passage, cautious optimism about our new understanding, and a quiet pride in having stood firm for my autonomy when it would have been easier to acquiesce. The hypothyroidism had been a blessing in disguise in a way. Without Dr. Mitchell's diagnosis, without the clear medical explanation for my symptoms, my children might have succeeded in having me declared incompetent. Instead, that medical crisis had forced a necessary reckoning about power, respect, and the complexity of aging with dignity. Later that evening, as I sat in my garden watching twilight settle over the heritage roses, I thought about the road ahead. There would be challenges, certainly: the inevitable physical changes of advancing age, the distance from Richard and his family, the practical difficulties of maintaining independence as abilities shifted. But I would face those challenges as Martha Wilson, not as an incompetent ward of my children or the state. I would navigate them with support from people who respected my personhood, not just my parenthood, and I would continue making my own choices about my own life for as long as I possibly could. The phone rang, interrupting my reflections. It was Dr. Mitchell, returned from his family emergency. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm calling to apologize for the abrupt rescheduling. I understand Dr. Ramirez saw you in my absence." "Yes, he did. Very thoroughly. In fact." "Excellent. I've reviewed his notes and your latest labs. The increased dosage seems appropriate given your levels." He paused. "And how are things with your children? Has the diagnosis helped them understand your situation better?" I smiled, thinking of the journey we'd traveled in just a few short weeks. "It has, though not without some difficult conversations along the way. But we've reached an understanding I can live with." "I'm very glad to hear it. Family support is crucial, but so is respect for autonomy." He chuckled softly. "Medical diagnosis is often the easy part. The human relationships are where things get complicated." How right he was. As we finished our conversation and I returned to watching the evening deepen in my garden, I felt a profound gratitude for the unexpected gifts this crisis had brought. Not just the medical treatment that was restoring my health, but the hard-won clarity about what I needed from my family and from myself as I navigated this final chapter of life. 2 months passed swiftly. Richard's preparation for the Chicago move consumed much of his attention, while Patty began stopping by more regularly, sometimes just for tea, other times to help with small tasks around the house. Our new understanding felt tentative but genuine, a bridge being carefully rebuilt after near collapse. The most significant changes happened in my home. Following our agreement, I had safety bars installed in the bathrooms, converted the downstairs, study into a laundry room to avoid the basement stairs, and upgraded to a medical alert system that I wore as a stylish pendant rather than the clunky wristband often marketed to seniors. These modifications acknowledged physical realities while preserving my dignity, practicality without surrender. Eddie remained my steadfast ally, driving me to appointments and helping with household repairs his arthritis would permit. We developed a comfortable routine of shared meals several times a week, enjoying each other's company without any need to define our relationship beyond friendship and mutual support. My health continued to improve as my thyroid levels stabilized with the adjusted medication. The fog that had once clouded my thinking had lifted completely, replaced by the mental clarity I'd always prided myself on. Dr. Mitchell pronounced my condition well controlled at my latest checkup, shifting me to quarterly monitoring rather than monthly. Life had found a new equilibrium, until the day the certified letter arrived. I recognized Warren Phillips's firm name on the return address and opened it with mild curiosity, assuming it related to the legal documents we'd been updating. Instead, I found a formal notice addressed to both me and my children, marked Urgent Legal Matter, Estate of Agnes Peterson. Agnes Peterson, my late sister's mother-in-law, a woman I'd barely known who had passed away nearly 20 years ago. What possible legal matter could involve both me and my children after all this time? The letter was brief, but startling. Agnes had apparently established a trust fund decades earlier, with assets to be distributed to her extended family upon specific conditions. The triggering condition, the death of her last surviving sibling, had finally occurred 3 months ago. As distant relations through my sister's marriage, my children and I were among the beneficiaries. Warren's letter explained that the trust contained substantial property holdings and investments, now valued at approximately $6 million. My share as an elder family relation was 20%, over $1 million, with Richard and Patty each receiving 10%. The remaining 60% was divided among closer blood relatives. I sat heavily in my kitchen chair, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. $1 million. The sum was staggering, wholly unexpected, and frankly, unwelcome in its timing. Just as we had established a careful balance in our family dynamics, this financial windfall threatened to upset everything. Just as I feared, the inheritance brought new pressures. Richard immediately suggested I use the money to move to Lakeside Gardens, an upscale senior living community. He went so far as to place a hold on a unit without consulting me first. Our confrontation that night was tense but necessary. I had to remind him firmly that my inheritance didn't change our agreement about respecting my autonomy. Thankfully, Patty proved an unexpected ally, suggesting a follow-up session with Simone to address how the inheritance impacted our family agreement. The meeting was productive, with everyone eventually contributing ideas for how the money could enhance my independence rather than replace it. Home improvements, transportation services, prepaid assistance for when I might need it in the future. "Martha," Dr. Mitchell said during my quarterly checkup, "your thyroid levels have stabilized beautifully. The medication is working exactly as it should." He reviewed my chart with satisfaction. "Your overall health is excellent for someone of any age, let alone 85. "Thank you," I replied, feeling validated after months of struggle to be seen as competent. The improvement in my thinking has been remarkable. No more brain fog, no more forgetting appointments or where I put things. "Hypothyroidism can be insidious that way," he agreed. "The symptoms develop so gradually that people often attribute them to just getting older, rather than recognizing them as a medical condition." As I prepared to leave, he asked a question that caught me by surprise. "How are things with your children? Has our diagnosis helped them understand your situation better?" I smiled, thinking of the journey we'd traveled. It has, though not without some difficult conversations. Richard is moving to Chicago next month, which initially increased his anxiety about my living alone. But we've reached an understanding I can live with. That's excellent. Family support is crucial, but so is respect for autonomy. He made a final note in my chart. "I'll see you in 3 months unless you need me sooner." Outside the medical building, Eddie waited in his freshly washed car. Our dinner at Vincenzo's 2 weeks earlier had been lovely, unexpectedly so, and we'd been spending even more time together since. Nothing rushed or dramatic, just a comfortable deepening of our long friendship into something more. "Good news?" he asked as I settled into the passenger seat. "All systems normal," I confirmed. "Quarterly checkups from now on." "Told you so," he said with satisfaction. Never doubted it for a minute. We drove in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke again. "Martha, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." The seriousness in his tone made me turn to study his profile. "What is it?" "Richard's moving next week. You'll have the house to yourself again." "Yes," I agreed, wondering where this was heading. "And with that inheritance, you can afford pretty much whatever help you might need." I waited, sensing there was more to this conversation than stating obvious facts. Eddie pulled the car, to the side of the road, putting it in park before turning to face me fully. I've been thinking. My house is too big for just me since June passed. Your place is better, more accessible, closer to town. What if I sold mine and moved in with you? The suggestion took me completely by surprise. Eddie, are you proposing? He chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. Not exactly. Or maybe I am. At our age, does it matter what we call it? I'm suggesting we stop living alone when we could be keeping each other company, supporting each other, making whatever time we have left better. I considered his words carefully. Eddie had become essential to my life, my advocate, my companion, my friend. The thought of sharing my home with him wasn't unwelcome, but it raised practical questions. What about my independence? I asked. The autonomy I've fought so hard to protect. That doesn't change, he said firmly. You'd still make your own decisions. I'd make mine. We'd just be making them side by side instead of across the street from each other. He grinned suddenly. And think how it would give those kids of yours something new to worry about. The image of Richard and Patty's faces upon learning that Eddie and I were living together made me laugh out loud. They'd be scandalized. Probably, he agreed cheerfully. Though they'd have to admit it makes practical sense. Two old folks looking out for each other is safer than each living alone. He had a point. Our arrangement would address many of the concerns my children had raised about my safety while maintaining my essential independence. And beyond the practicalities, there was the simple pleasure of Eddie's company, his dry humor, his steadfast loyalty, his respect for who I was. I'll think about it, I promised. It wasn't a decision to make impulsively, even at our age. Eddie nodded, apparently satisfied, and put the car back in drive. No rush, just something to consider. 3 days later, Richard and his family came for a farewell dinner before their move to Chicago. The evening was bittersweet, memories shared, promises made to visit regularly, plans for video calls with the grandchildren. Throughout, I observed Richard carefully, noting how he refrained from offering unsolicited advice about my living situation or financial decisions. Our work with Simone had created real change, however imperfect. As they prepared to leave, Richard lingered behind while Beth took the children to the car. "Mom," he said, enveloping me in a hug that felt different from his usual perfunctory embraces. "I'm sorry for how I handled things. The competency concerns, the Lakeside Gardens pressure, all of it." "I know," I said softly. "You were worried. Your methods were wrong, but your concern was genuine." He nodded against my shoulder, before pulling back to look at me directly. "Promise you'll tell me if you need anything? Just because I'm in Chicago doesn't mean I can't help." "I promise," I assured him. "But Richard, sometimes help means respecting my choices, not trying to fix situations I don't consider broken." "I'm learning that," he acknowledged with a rueful smile. "Slowly, but I'm learning." After they left, I sat in my garden watching twilight settle over the heritage roses. The Chicago move would test our new understanding, distance either diminishing interference or heightening anxiety that might manifest as renewed pressure. But I felt equipped to maintain boundaries while nurturing our relationship. My phone rang, interrupting my reflections. It was Patty, calling to check that I was okay after Richard's emotional departure. "I'm fine," I assured her. "It was a good evening. He's making real progress in how he approaches my situation." "We both are," she acknowledged. "Though I have to admit, I'm a little nervous about being the only one nearby now, if something happens." "Patty," I interrupted gently, "I need to tell you something. Eddie Harris has asked to move in with me." The silence that followed was so profound I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Patty, are you there?" "I'm here," she said faintly. "Did you just say Eddie wants to move in with you?" Like, romantically? The scandalized tone nearly made me laugh. Like, practically. And yes, perhaps romantically too, though at our age that's hardly the primary consideration. Mom? The shock in her voice was almost comical. You're 85. He's 88. Precisely why companionship matters, I pointed out. Reasonably. We enjoy each other's company. We help each other with tasks that have become difficult. And yes, we care for each other deeply. Another lengthy silence followed. Have you decided? Are you going to say yes? I'm considering it, I replied honestly. It makes sense on many levels, and it would address a number of the concerns you and Richard have raised about my living alone. I suppose it would, she admitted reluctantly. I just never imagined. At your age. That I might still value companionship? That I might not be content to live out my days in solitary independence? I kept my tone gentle despite the implied ageism in her response. Patty, aging doesn't diminish our need for connection. If anything, it makes it more precious. She sighed, and I could almost visualize her expression, conflicted, trying to reconcile her image of me as her elderly mother with this unexpected development. You're right. I'm sorry. It's just a lot to process. Take whatever time you need, I assured her. I haven't made a final decision yet myself. After we hung up, I smiled at the irony. For months, my children had worried about me living alone, suggesting various arrangements to ensure my safety and well-being. Now that a solution had presented itself, one that preserved my autonomy while providing companionship and practical support, it had thrown them into confusion. The next morning, I called Eddie and invited him to dinner at my house. Throughout the day, I moved through rooms filled with memories, imagining how they might change with Eddie's presence. His recliner in the corner of the living room, perhaps. His fishing gear stored in the garage alongside Thomas's old tools. His photographs mingling with mine on the mantelpiece. The thought wasn't unsettling. If anything, it felt right. Not a replacement for the life I'd built, but an evolution of it. A new chapter rather than an entirely new book. When Eddie arrived that evening, I had the table set on the back porch, candles flickering in the gentle summer breeze. His eyes widened slightly at the formal arrangement. Special occasion? He asked as he took his seat. Yes, I replied simply. I've made a decision about your suggestion. His expression grew cautious, hands resting on the table edge as if bracing himself. And? I think it's an excellent idea. Practical, sensible, and desirable. I smiled, enjoying the way his face relaxed into hopeful anticipation. I would like very much for you to move in, Eddie. We can list your house next month, after Richard is settled in Chicago. The joy that spread across his weathered face was worth any disapproval our arrangement might face. You mean it? You're sure? I've rarely been more certain of anything, I assured him. Life is too short at any age to waste opportunities for happiness. At ours, it would be downright foolish. We spent the evening discussing practical arrangements, which furniture he would bring, how we would divide household responsibilities, whether we should update our legal documents to reflect our new relationship. Throughout, I felt a growing certainty that this decision, unlike so many others recently challenged by my children, would face minimal opposition once they witnessed the positive impact on my well-being. 3 days later, I received an unexpected visit from Dr. Chen, the geriatric psychiatrist who had performed my capacity assessment months earlier. She had been in the neighborhood for another appointment and stopped by with a professional courtesy that seemed to mask personal curiosity. I heard from Dr. Mitchell that your thyroid condition is well controlled now, she said as we settled in my living room. That's excellent news. Yes, the medication has made a tremendous difference, I confirmed, wondering about the real purpose of her visit. She smiled, setting her teacup down carefully. I hope you don't mind my asking, but I've been curious about how things resolved with your family. When you came for your assessment, there was significant tension about your autonomy and decision-making. I appreciated her directness. We worked with a mediator named Simone Parker. Perhaps you know her? She helped us establish a family agreement that respects my independence while addressing legitimate concerns. Simone is excellent. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. And has the agreement held? Often these family dynamics remain challenging, especially with adult children who are well-intentioned but controlling. I thought about Richard's journey from attempting to declare me incompetent to his heartfelt apology before moving to Chicago. About Patty's evolution from passive enabler to thoughtful ally. About the inheritance that had tested our new understanding and ultimately strengthened it. It hasn't been perfect, I acknowledged. But yes, fundamentally it has held. My children have learned, sometimes reluctantly, to respect my choices even when they differ from what they would prefer. Dr. Chen's expression was one of professional satisfaction. That's wonderful to hear. These situations too often end with elders surrendering their autonomy out of exhaustion or family relationships deteriorating beyond repair. We came close to both outcomes, I admitted. What made the difference, I think, was having the medical explanation for my symptoms. Once my children understood that my issues were thyroid-related rather than cognitive, it became harder for them to justify taking control. She nodded thoughtfully. Medical clarity can be powerful that way, though in my experience, families determined to take control will simply find other justifications if the cognitive one is removed. True enough, I agreed, thinking of Richard's persistence even after my diagnosis. Which is why the legal documentation of my capacity was equally important. It gave me leverage in our negotiations. And now, how are you feeling about your situation? Her question seemed genuinely interested rather than clinically assessing. I smiled, thinking of Eddie and our plans, of the house improvements underway with my inheritance, of the literacy fund being established in my name at the library, of Richard's weekly video calls from Chicago and Patty's more frequent visits. I searched for the right word. Vindicated. Not in a triumphant way, but in the quiet satisfaction of having stood my ground for something that mattered. Deeply. Dr. Chen rose to leave, extending her hand. Mrs. Wilson, it's been a pleasure to follow your journey, even peripherally. You've done something remarkable, maintained your dignity and autonomy against considerable pressure. Many elders in similar situations aren't so fortunate. After she left, I sat in my garden watching bees navigate between late summer blossoms. At 85, I had faced my children's attempt to declare me incompetent and emerged not just with my autonomy intact, but with deeper understanding on all sides. The medical diagnosis had been the turning point, the scientific evidence that had forced a reevaluation of assumptions. But the true victory hadn't been in proving them wrong. It had been in establishing a new foundation for our relationship, one built on respect rather than control, collaboration rather than management. The inheritance, Eddie's companionship, even Richard's move to Chicago, all were simply new chapters, in a story that continued to unfold with dignity and purpose. The phone rang, interrupting my reflections. It was Eddie, calling to confirm our dinner plans. As we chatted about menu options and whether we should invite Doris from Bridge Club to join us, I felt a profound gratitude for this unexpected late-life companionship, for the medical intervention that had restored my mental clarity, for the hard-won respect of my children, for the financial security that allowed me to age on my own terms. At 85, I had faced one of the most difficult challenges, the questioning of my basic competence, and emerged stronger, with relationships tested but ultimately deepened through honest confrontation and genuine resolution. The path forward wasn't without potential obstacles. My health would eventually decline, my needs would change. But now, There was a framework for addressing those changes that honored my personhood rather than diminishing it. And for today, that was enough. 7 o'clock then, I confirmed to Eddie, and wear something nice. We're celebrating. Celebrating what? He asked, a smile evident in his voice. I glanced around my garden, at the heritage roses Thomas and I had planted, at the tomato vines Eddie had helped stake, at the bird feeder Patty had brought last week, and answered with simple truth. Life, Eddie. We're celebrating life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.